This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Over to the occupied West Bank, where Israeli occupation troops have killed one Palestinian fighter from the Fateh movement and uncovered explosives in the city of Nablus. On the second day of a large-scale military raid into the town, Israeli soldiers shot and killed the Palestinian activist as he fled from the troops in a refugee camp near Nablus. Israel launched the latest operation in the Nablus area yesterday, sending in 50 armored vehicles, clamping a curfew on the city center and conducting house-to-house searches for Palestinians it wanted to detain. Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad has accused Israel of trying to undermine his cabinet by conducting the offensive, despite the Palestinian president's vows to take his own steps to disarm gunmen. On the diplomatic front, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has arrived to Geneva to attend a meeting of the International Socialist Council. Over 400 delegates from 120 political parties from around the world were expected to attend the meeting to discuss actions taken by social movements to help resolve conflicts. President Abbas was due to address the conference on prospects for peace in the Middle East before going to Paris later in the day, where he will meet with President Nicolas Sarkozy. In Lebanon, 3 protesters have been killed and 50 others wounded when army troops fired at a protest by Palestinians demanding to return to a besieged refugee camp in northern Lebanon. The soldiers opened fire first into the air as hundreds of refugees tried to storm through an army checkpoint and head to the Nahr al-Barid camp, a scene of nearly 6 weeks of intense fighting between the army and the Al-Qaeda-inspired Fateh al-Islam militants. When the crowd did not disperse and attacked soldiers with stones and sticks, the troops fired automatic rifles at the protest, inflicting the casualties who were rushed to hospitals in the city of Tripoli. The refugees from Nahr al-Barid had started to march from the nearby Badawi camp, where they had sought refuge after the battles began on May the 20th. The incident will likely increase tensions at Lebanon's 11 other Palestinian refugee camps, already close to boiling point over fighting in northern Lebanon that has killed more than 200 people so far.
Now, food is being trucked into Gaza for the first time in 16 days. Israel has opened the Karni crossing for the first time since Hamas took over. Our correspondent Jackie Rowland is there. Jackie, much needed wheat on its way to the bakeries of Gaza, I gather.
Yes, Lauren, it's wheat today that's come in for the first time in 16 days. Wheat, absolutely vital for making flour and making bread. In fact, until this load came in today, Gaza only had enough flour left for 9 days. Now, this has been the first time in 16 days that the terminal has been operating in, bringing in vital supplies and also showing some sort of coordination, at least, between the Israeli side and the Palestinian side of Karni crossing. Now, to talk more about the humanitarian needs of the Gaza Strip, we're joined by the spokesman for the UN Relief and Works Agency, Christopher Gunnis. So today it's wheat that's gone in. What else do you need to get into Gaza urgently?
Well, let me say first of all that we at UNRWA and my colleagues at WFP, the World Food Programme, warmly welcome the fact that Karni, the main commercial transshipment point into Gaza, is open. And we praise the parties, the Israelis, the IDF, the Israeli army, and of course on the Palestinian side for making this happen. As you say, it's 5,000 tons of wheat. We need more. We need basic food supplies to come in. But beyond that, Jackie, what we need is other sorts of of humanitarian supplies, something as basic as concrete. For a public water system to work, it has to be in good repair. We don't want a public water system that isn't in that state in Gaza, because things, waterborne disease, for example, could break out. So we need beyond the basic foodstuffs. And let's not forget that between the World Food Programme and UNRWA, we feed more than 3/4 of Gaza's 1.5 million people.
As you're saying, Chris, it's aid. We're talking about aid coming in and the great dependence of the people of Gaza on aid. But in order for the Gaza economy to really start to be revitalised, we're going to need to see this terminal working in other ways as well, aren't we?
That is an extremely important point. The World Food Programme is clear that to avoid food insecurity, there has to be a functioning economy. People have to have a disposable income, according to WFP, to buy food, to see to their basic household needs. So, yes, we want to avoid aid dependency. The UN family, UNRWA, is clear about that. At the moment, 80% of Gaza or so are dependent on distributions from us. We don't want that to become total aid dependency. So Karni, for commercial transshipments, must be opened permanently if we're to avoid that sort of growing aid dependency.
So we're talking about food going in, but also exports from Gaza coming out.
Well, interestingly, when Karni was functioning earlier in the year, there were as many as 40 trucks coming out. Palestinian economy in Gaza is dead on its feet. Unemployment is going to rise, and that, of course, increases the dependency, the aid dependency that we're just talking about on the UN agencies. We don't want that. So, yes, exports have to start functioning. We welcome what's happened here today. As I say, we have great praise for the parties. However, we have to build on this success. We have to make sure that Karni, the main commercial transshipment point, is fully operational, and only then can exports really start to work. And there are international agreements which allow this to take place.
From a political point of view, Chris, I mean, how significant is this? It seems that on the most basic logistical basis, at least, there has been some kind of coordination, some kind of cooperation between people here on the Israeli side and people on the Palestinian side who are receiving this vital aid.
Well, as a humanitarian, I have to say that operational contacts have been good, and those operational contacts on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side do have to continue. It's clear from the fact that Karni was properly up and function, at least for the grain today, that there is some kind of will to make this happen, and we would urge the parties to build on that will. It's important that the cooperation there's been that continue, and our contacts with the parties certainly have been excellent.
Christopher Gunnis, thanks very much. Christopher Gunnis from UNRWA joining us there to talk about the significance of the fact that the Karni crossing has been working today for the first time in 16 days. 5,000 tons of wheat have gone in to enable the people of Gaza to make bread. But crucially, the UN agencies do say that in order for people in Gaza to have their basic food needs, there should be 120 trucks of food going into Gaza per day. So that's still clearly quite a target for people to meet here at the Karni crossing. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Jackie.
The official political spokesman for Fateh, Abad Abdul Rahman, said that the Palestinian president and head of Fateh, Mahmoud Abbas, told the Central Committee to take the necessary measures to protect the objectives and standpoints of Fateh in addressing what he described as distortions provided by Central Committee member Hani al-Hassan during an interview for Bila Hudud Without Borders program on Al Jazeera. Abdul Rahman added that Hassan degraded himself to the same level of those he described as bloody ousters, and that he stood against the movement. Meanwhile, Fatah leader Samir Almash Hawari condemned Hani al-Hassan for his statements in the interview, accusing him of warning Khalid Mish'el a month ago of a possible attack by the military wing of Mohammed Dahlan against Hamas in Gaza.
The most dangerous of his disclosures yesterday was the existence of an agreement between himself and the leadership of Hamas to target a particular wing in Fatah. During the interview, he said that based on principle, it's legitimate and an allowable tactic to target the wing, saying that Fatah is not the target, rather a particular wing in Fatah that he described as American and Zionist. His only objection was that Hamas overstepped its boundaries and breached the agreement by targeting legal Palestinian establishments and the homes of Abu Ammar, Abu Jihad, Abu Mazen, and so forth. Thus, he showed that he served his own interests and exposed secret agreements between himself and others like him within the Hamas movement. And today, I'm obliged to disclose the information we have, which is that Hani Hassan informed Khaled Michel about a month prior that the Dahlan wing, as he called it, is getting ready to attack Hamas, and that Hamas should proceed quickly in obstructing this plan by attacking the wing first.
Also, the Secretary General of Fateh in the West Bank, Hussein al-Sheikh, sharply criticized al-Hassan, asking the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to take what he described as legal measures against al-Hassan.
ونقول في هذا الصدد بأن السيد هاني الحسن.
With regard to this matter, we declare Hani al-Hassan's standpoint, expressed yesterday on one of the satellite channels, as being representative of him, not the Fatah movement. We also call on the President Abu Mazen, as head of Fatah, and the Central Committee to take customary legal measures against Hani al-Hassan.
وكان هاني الحسن عضو اللجنة المركزية في حركة فتح.
Hani al-Hassan, member of Fatah Central Committee, had said in Bila Hudud, or Without Borders program, that what happened in Gaza was the collapse of a plan by U.S. General Dayton.
يرفض أن يعمل تحت تيار ديتون.
The accurate picture is that Dayton had a plan.
The U.S. general, who has been residing in Jerusalem since Hamas took over,
Yes, he was also recently called to Congress, where he boasted about planning, training, and so forth. What collapsed really was Dayton's plan, and the few people working with him, and those who believe in the U.S. standpoint. Fatah did not collapse in Gaza because technically 90% of it was not involved in this plan.
Mohammed Dahlan, did these clashes lead to the current situation in Gaza, or is there evidence to suggest that the coup d'etat was premeditated? Hamas is saying that it was a premeditated operation, as if Fateh was planning to do something and Hamas became aware of it.
على افتراض أن حركة فتح كانت تحضر لشيء فلنفترض ذلك.
Let's assume that Fatah was in fact preparing for some kind of action, which it wasn't. But let's just assume it were true. Does that justify a revolution? Does it justify spilling the blood of Muslims and Fatah members, robbing and dishonoring or destroying NGOs and breaking into the house of the president and martyr Abu Ammar and the house of martyr Abu Jihad, stealing his personal belongings, including his personal gun, which he last used against the Israeli forces when they broke into his house in Tunisia, or violating the office of the president Abu Mazen and entering his house and defiling it? All this was planned. And what's really strange and shocking is that Khaled Michel came out and said this is a step we had to take. What? Spilling the blood of Palestinians has become a necessary step? Or using deception and delusion to control the Palestinian people by force? I don't think there is any justification for what Hamas did, except that their spiteful and oppressive indoctrination only believes in killing as a means to enforce their dreadful logic on the Palestinian people. Take into consideration the experiences of all Islamic movements in Egypt, in Algeria, and Tunisia, and in Palestine. They are all similar. Even when the movement was first established in Palestine by the martyr Ahmed Yassin, they were forced into joining the First Intifada. Their beliefs and tactics remain the same, which consist of relying on killing and violence to enforce their blind logic and their reckless standpoints.
والمنهج واحد وهو الاعتماد على القتل والعنف في فرض منطقهم الأعمى ومواقفهم الهوجاء.
Mohammed Dahlan, at the time of the Mecca Agreement, the entire Arab population listened to enthusiastic speeches by President Abbas, Khalid Mash'al, and Ismail Haniyeh, who promised the Palestinian people that there would be no reverting to the policy of spilling blood and that it was prohibited to spill Palestinian blood. What happened after that? Why did the trust get broken? And why the return to the street with weapons and military action?
Not only trust was lost, and by the way, President Abu Mazen's speeches were sincere, and everyone knows of this man's trustworthiness and his honesty, which was part of our criticism of the President Abu Mazen in our private meetings. However, we stood by him and supported his opinions ad infinitum, and we will stand by him and face those tyrants. But when we had a discussion with Khalid Mash'al at that time, we presented him with many pieces of evidence, of practices and documents, but he did not believe any of it. This is because Hamas does not believe anyone but their own members. Hamas was concealing a lot of information from its leadership outside of Gaza, but that does not mean that the leadership was unaware or that it did not play a role in the decision-making during the last coup. The evidence is that Khalid Mash'al immediately adopted the coup and supported it under the assumption that things were proceeding the way they should, and that he does not need to provide justification for the action. As for the practices on the ground, since our return, Hamas did not desist for one day from assassinating the preventive security officers, or leaving explosive devices at the doors of police officials, or kidnapping some officials from Fateh. We were constantly following up with them. Their representatives would start following up with their security systems, and we never got anywhere, until they used a B-7 missile to explode the car of Baha Baluche, a prominent leader. By the way, Baha had earlier made a bilateral agreement on the sidelines, prior to the Mecca agreements, to avoid any confrontations with Hamas. We supported his position and stood by him, except that Hamas have their own mindset on what they want, and they think that they are never wrong. Have you ever heard Hamas apologize for any behavior?
The British tabloid The Sun reported that Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces have been spotted by British troops crossing the border into southern Iraq. A report by the International Crisis Group said that violence in al-Basra, south of Iraq, indicates that there might be some gaps in the American security plan that was supposed to improve the country's situation. Our reporter has the details.
أفادت صحيفة The Sun البريطانية بأن القوات البريطانية رصدت قوات من الحرس الثوري الإيراني تعبر الحدود إلى جنوب العراق.
The British newspaper The Sun reported that British forces stopped some Iranian members that were crossing the borders into Iraq. An unidentified intelligence source told the tabloid, "It is an extremely alarming development and raises the stakes considerably. We have hard proof that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps have crossed the border to attack British forces." The Sun said that radar sightings of Iranian helicopters crossing into the Iraqi desert were confirmed to it by very senior military sources. In response to the report, a British Defence Ministry spokesman said, "There is evidence that explosive devices used against our troops in southern Iraq originated in Iran," adding that any Iranian link to armed militias in Iraq, either through weapons supply, training or funding, are unacceptable. On the other hand, a report by the International Crisis Group said that violence in al-Basra, south of Iraq, shows that there might be some gaps in the American security plan that was supposed to improve the country's situation.
ينذر بثغرات في الخطة الأمريكية لتحسين الأوضاع الأمنية في البلاد. وذكر تقرير المجموعة التي تتخذ من بروكسل مقرا لها أن الرد على العنف المروع في العراق لا يمكن.
The organization, which is located in Brussels, said that a tangible military presence is necessary to empower the current political leadership and to establish partnerships with dominant political parties in Iraq. The report said that armed militias in al-Basra have joined the local security forces but maintain loyalty to different political factions dominant in southern Iraq. A fraction of al-Basra's police forces follow the Mahdi army, which is controlled by the religious figure Muqtada al-Sadr. Meanwhile, the Higher Council for the Islamic Revolution has influence within the intelligence forces, and the al-Fadila party controls the oil security forces. The report also said that al-Basra is far from being a model to be replicated. It is instead an example of what to avoid. With renewed violence and instability, Basra illustrates the pitfalls of a transitional process that has led to the collapse of state apparatus. Furthermore, the lessons learned from al-Basra are that political parties do not respect the law, but are instead a part of the problem. The prolonging of the current political plan with the current political players will ensure the slow destruction of the rest of Iraq.
سيضمن أن ما بقي من دولة العراق سيتمزق تدريجياً.
U.S. soldiers killed 4 civilians and arrested 15 others during the pre-dawn raid today in Khojiani district, which lies in the foothills of the provincial capital Jalalabad, the head of Afghanistan's human rights group said. He said those killed in the raid were an 85-year-old man, Muhammad Jan, 2 of his sons and a grandson. President Hamid Karzai and provincial officials said last week that scores of civilians had been killed recently in foreign troops operations in Afghanistan. Facing resurgent Taliban attacks, growing dissatisfaction over rampant corruption, as well as crime and lack of economic development, Karzai said the foreign troops would fail in Afghanistan unless they took more care to protect non-combatants while hunting the Taliban.
U.S. President George Bush announced that he will be appointing the first envoy to the Organization of the Islamic Conference, while also calling on moderate Muslims to condemn extremism. He described extremists as the real enemy of Islam. On the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Islamic Center in Washington, Bush said in his speech that appointing a special envoy to the Muslim world demonstrates to Muslim societies that his country is serious about engaging in honest dialogue and building lasting, friendly relations with Muslims of the world.
This is U.S. President George Bush's 3rd visit to the Islamic Center in Washington. It came on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the center. President Bush reiterated the extent of his understanding and respect for Islam and Muslims throughout the world. He announced a new initiative to appoint for the first time an American envoy to the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which includes 57 Muslim-majority nations.
Envoy will listen to.
Bush said that the new envoy will listen to the representatives of the Islamic countries and learn from them, as well as present American values and points of view in order to demonstrate to Muslims the extent of America's interest in dialogue based on respect and lasting friendship. Bush did not reveal the name of the new envoy. However, the Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, Karen Hughes, said that the name of the envoy will be announced in the coming weeks. Attending the celebration of the Islamic Center in Washington were a number of American Muslim community leaders and some ambassadors from Islamic countries who welcomed President Bush's gesture, including the Palestinian Liberation Organization representative in Washington, Afif Safiya.
ومنهم ممثل منظمة التحرير الفلسطينية لدى واشنطن عفيف صافية.
كان لفتة إيجابية وقدرها الجميع.
This was a positive gesture and everyone appreciated it. The announcement that he will appoint a special envoy to the Organization of the Islamic Conference is a very positive step. In previous years, we suffered from a kind of political, diplomatic, and communicational marginalization. I believe that some government sectors feel that there is a need to increase and intensify diplomacy and open channels of communication.
These days,
during the celebration, Sheikh Abdullah Hooge, the head of the Islamic Center in Washington, reiterated that Islam is a religion of tolerance and moderation that rejects violence and extremism. He also welcomed President Bush's gesture at this time.
العديد من الأمريكان بيظن أن المسلمين
Many Americans assume that Muslims are killing their sons and soldiers for no reason. God willing, President Bush's visit will play an active and effective role in letting Americans in the United States know that Islam is a religion of peace.
President Bush's new initiative reflects the fact that Washington understands that its image is deteriorating in the Islamic world and that it needs to correct this image. If so, this raises the question once again, is this the image a result of Washington's policies, or is its inability to explain these policies? Most likely it has to do with both. From Washington, Mohammed Al-Satuhi, Egypt News TV.
من واشنطن محمد السطوحي النيل قناة مصر الإخبارية.
More than 2 million Iraqis have fled their homes since the war began. Will neighboring countries keep hosting them? And why has the U.S. admitted fewer than 800 Iraqi refugees thus far? Answers to these questions and more on Link TV's Mosaic Intelligence Report.
With the power struggle in Palestine, battles raging at Nahr al-Barid in Lebanon, and daily explosions in Baghdad, the World Refugee Day has come and gone, hardly noticed by world media on June 20th. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees recently reported that in 2006 alone, 1.2 million Iraqis fled to other countries to escape the war. Another 2 million have been displaced within Iraq since the war began, including 700,000 last year. The total Iraqi refugee population is growing by about 50,000 a month as sectarian violence spreads unchecked.
This is not life. We do not have any source of income. The widows are not getting any assistance. The children have done nothing to deserve to live like this.
To put this in perspective, this would be the equivalent of a Katrina-induced displacement every 2 months, according to Elizabeth Ferris, co-director of the Brookings Burn Project on Internal Displacement. The United States remains at the bottom of the list of countries that have accepted Iraqi refugees. Although the State Department has promised to admit as many as 7,000 this year, it has taken fewer than 500 since 2003, in contrast to the almost 1 million it took during the war in Vietnam, or even the 30,000 Iraqis following the Persian Gulf War. Iraqi's refugee population is seriously impacting neighboring countries. Jordan, reeling from an estimated 750,000 Iraqi refugees, has tightened entry requirements and imposed certain conditions on Iraqis that wish to stay in the country. Saudi Arabia has kept its doors firmly shut and plans to build a US-Mexico-style border fence to keep Iraqis out. However, the problem is reaching crisis proportions in Syria, a poor country that faces US economic sanctions. More than 1.4 million Iraqis have fled there since the 2003 invasion, with about 30,000 more arriving every month. The Iraqi influx has put a massive strain on Syrian society, triggering inflation and overburdening social services. There are also some 400,000 Palestinian refugees who have lived in Syria since the creation of Israel in 1948. The Bush administration has long accused Syria of not doing enough to stop Al-Qaeda sympathizers from slipping into Iraq, but it barely mentions the far larger number of Iraqis who cross the border in the other direction. Incidentally, the government of Sweden has offered to resettle 25,000 Iraqis and has dealt generously with the tens of thousands of Iraqi asylum seekers arriving on its border. The US unquestionably has a greater responsibility than the government of Sweden to respond to this humanitarian nightmare. In defense to this, the First Lady recently said that the US has spent $80 million dealing with the Iraqi refugee crisis. But as one blogger put it, this finances less than 11 hours worth of Iraq occupation and is, as government programs go, mere pocket change. I'm Jamal Dajani for the Mosaic Intelligence Report. To learn more about this program or to share your thoughts, visit us at linktv.org/mosaic.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.